Anyway, good evening fellow resistors. Today is April 12th and you're listening to the WideShut webcast on Resistance Radio. That's wideshut.co.uk and resistradio.com. I'll just do the customary mic check. Can everybody hear me okay in the chat? And while you respond, I'm just going to stand up to the camera, because I am filming this, to show off my new hoodie that has Gordon Brown, David Cameron and Nick Clegg on the front, and it says the Three Stooges, whatever you say Mr. Banker. And I won't attempt to turn around, and one of my cameras is just fucking frozen. Great, good start. Anyway, on the back it has the famous Mayor Amschel Rothschild quote, you know, give me control of a nation's money, blah de blah. And that was supposed to be for the London protest, but I only got it the other week, so I'm wearing it today. So, did you all hear me okay? Okay, loud and clear. I'm still getting that static though. I think they're out after me. But anyway, how's everybody doing tonight? I hope you're all resisting. I hope you're all resisting the census. Got one of the census enforcement officers at my door the other day. Of course, my census was set on fire in Hyde Park on one of the anarchist bonfires. So, some ignorant job's worth has been assigned to my house. And they've called once so far. We didn't actually open the door because we were in the garden. It was a lovely sunny day. We weren't expecting anybody, so there's no need to get up out of the deck chair to answer the door to people you don't know. But but she had the gall, this lady, to peek over the fence. But we still ignored her as if she wasn't there. So she left a little note under the door, which I've got here. I would have shown it to the camera, well, one of them, but I have to show it to this one because it decided to freeze. There it is, the census note. Of course, it's only a reminder. It's not a threat. It just says, don't forget to complete your census questionnaire. I didn't forget, I didn't do it. I'm not gonna do it. According to our questionnaire tracking system, you haven't returned your census questionnaire yet. But don't worry, I wasn't worrying. There's still time. Simply fill it out and blah de blah. I don't get it, folks, I don't get it. What are these people doing this job for? I'm sure most of them don't really have any idea. I'm sure they don't know about Lockheed Martin. I'm sure they're just there, you know, because jobs are hard to come by. I'm sure they're just getting money to feed their family. Unfortunately, that's the system we're in. They think we're being a nuisance when really it's them that are being a nuisance and are being rude, peeking over people's fences, trying to get them to fill out a form that has, in a roundabout way, paid arms manufacturers to make more weapons to kill more innocent people around the world. And there is a few videos on YouTube of people opening the door to these census people and sort of going over their main problems with the census, and some of them seem completely oblivious. One or two do know about Lockheed Martin, but you can tell they've been trained to say that no, Lockheed Martin don't have any role in the census. Well, yeah, they do have a role in the census. The role they have in the census is that they got £150 million. The catch is they subcontracted their role out to smaller companies. But that doesn't mean they didn't get the 150 million to start with. So it's still money going to murderers. But some of these census people don't seem to have done their own research. You can't blame them because, as I say, that's the system we're in. They're just led to believe that we're the ones being a nuisance. Now, my personal philosophy about this census resistance is have absolutely no contact. I know some people want to answer the door and do videos and help other people to sort of understand the reasonings behind it and certain strategies. That's fine, but personally for me it's just don't contact with them at all. Don't even give them the courtesy of opening the door, because then you can open yourself up to different problems. I don't even personally support the no contract return to sender thing, for one reason, because they've come out and said that they will try their best to prosecute people if they've shown a direct intent to not fill out the form. So if they think you're protesting and you're deliberately ignoring them, then they're going to try and prosecute you. So my philosophy is don't even answer the door, and there's not a possible way they could know and who you are. There's no evidence, and they're basically just going to have to ignore you in the end, because there's no way they're getting you to sign anything, to answer any questions, to even reveal yourself, to even show them what you look like. And this return, no contract return to sender thing, to me, I know that's not the intention, and there's a certain the whole lawful rebellion side to it, but my impression of that has always been you've got criminals running the country, whether you know the law or not, they don't want to use that law, so you're screwed. And I think sending that back could be construed as showing direct intent to not fill out the census, because you've just said, look, I'm sending it back, I'm not filling it out. If you don't answer the door, you've not said you're not filling it out. You could have been busy, you might not have been there, you might be completely oblivious to the census. What about people that don't have a television? I know that's a scary thought to some people, but some people don't have televisions, they don't read the mainstream news, they might not even bloody know that there is a census. So that's kind of my take on it. So it's no contact at all. Don't open the door. They don't have your name. They can't prosecute your house. They can't prosecute the occupier. And the enforcement jobs are temporary, only for a few months. So just hold tight for a few months. Don't answer the door, and there's no doubt in my mind that thousands and thousands of people are gonna be fine. That's the route I'm taking. We don't need to support the bombing of more brown people through this census, which got Lockheed Martin 150 million. We just don't need to do that. There's no reason to. If you know that that's what's happening, then there's absolutely no reason to be supporting this thing. And speaking of the bombing of poor brown people, this brings me to today's main topic, and that's the IMF takeover, or more like the IMF re-strategizing of the Ivory Coast. I did a big article on this yesterday. Well, I wrote it on and off for a few days, but it went up yesterday. I'll paste it in the chat. I think it's above the chat anyway. Put the link in the description. But there's the link to the article. And to cut a long story short, folks, the Ivory Coast is a poor African nation with lots of resources that rich globalists and imperialists have continually pillaged and controlled, much like every other African nation. As Henry Kissinger said in Memorandum 200, basically we can't have the third world developing. We can't have the third world muscling in on our profits. We've got to reduce their populations. We've got to make sure our buddies in the New World Order get to own all the resources. It's as simple as that. It's the Western elite wanting to own everything. And that's basically what's happening in Africa, and what's always been happening since slavery ended. And I was doing some research recently about how to buy non-sweatshop clothes, and lots of forums and websites, all over the internet, while I was googling for this kind of thing, trying to find some clothes that aren't made by slaves. There was this arrogant mantra that if we didn't give them these sweatshop jobs, they'd have nothing at all. And this idea that we're actually helping them by giving them 1p a year, well, that's exaggerating, but you know what I mean, the most ridiculous wage ever, to work most of their lives in little bunkers making our crappy clothes. They sleep and eat in these, it's a prison, okay? But there's this idea that we're helping them, because if we didn't do this, they'd have nothing at all. Well, that's just settling for the lesser of two evils. That's like saying it's okay to murder somebody with a gun to the head, because that's more humane than murdering somebody with a butcher knife. Well, it's still murder, and it's still slavery. If the corporations didn't take over these countries, if the IMF didn't get them into debt, if the Western crony capitalist system wasn't forced onto them, they wouldn't need to be working in a sweatshop to get money to buy crappy food. They could use their vast natural resources and land to, I don't know, grow their own food like humans have done for thousands of years. But no, they've got to live like us, and they've got to be our slaves. And my dad once, he made this off-the-cuff remark to me. He said, well, they're not much better than animals, are they? My dad's a very ignorant person. He didn't mean that as it sounds, but he basically said, they're not much better than animals anyway. And actually, he's right, in a way, but it's not because they're genetically inferior. Try and outrun an African. You're going to lose the race. They've got much purer genetics than we have. It's not because they're stupid. It's because they're caged like animals in a system where they have no control over their own lives, over their own resources, their own land. We simply went from imperialism to the illusion of democracy, better known as cartel capitalism. You have the freedom to choose who we choose for you. There's still slavery, it's just masked behind cartel capitalism. So it's not that Africans are stupid or just not advanced as us Western white folk. It's us Western white folk predominantly, not that it's really a racial issue, but we're the ones that have enslaved them and stopped them from developing. If they had the same chances as we had, they'd be just as well industrialised and advanced as us. But we don't let them, because then they would be taking our money. And I'm not saying our money, I mean the elite's money. And that's basically the same reason why I also don't support foreign aid. I don't support things like comic relief, which is a TV marathon in the UK. I think it's every year or every couple of years, where they have celebrities and sometimes politicians. They had old Gordon Brown this year doing some funny comedy skit, because he's a person too, everybody. And you get all these people encouraging people to give money. They'll have comedy acts, and then they'll cut to some starving Africans, and they'll play on your emotions, just trying to get everybody to give money in these foreign aid programs. It's the same concept as we've got to give them these jobs, because if we don't, that's, you know, we're actually helping them with these sweatshops. It's sort of the same concept. People think, oh, we're helping them, we gave money for comic relief. Well, how much are you really helping? Or is it just some kind of fake karma to stroke your own ego? Oh, you have £100 to comic relief, look at me, I give to charity. Then you go off in your BMW to your government paid job somewhere. There's no helping Africa until you let Africa own Africa. You can send aid and they end up with a few more bags of grain or a water pump in one of the villages. What they really need is self-sustainability. And unless people fight for that, you're just supporting the slavery they're under, because it gives the illusion that you're helping them. So I've kind of digressed there, but what's happening in the Ivory Coast? Well, they recently had elections, and according to the establishment, that's the UN, the African Union, the European Union, according to this establishment, the winner of the election was a guy named Alassane Ouattara. He's basically the current Western imperialist-backed puppet. He's who the elite want in power. The reigning president at the time was a man named Laurent Gbagbo, who was actually captured yesterday, and I've got to do a bit more, you know, updates on that front. But I'm just going to go into the history of what led to this point. So the elite are saying that this Alassane Ouattara won the election, whereas the Ivory Coast Constitutional Council, the body that actually makes the announcement, said no. Gbagbo retained the presidency. So essentially we have both sides claiming that there's been election fraud, and it's quite likely that there has been election fraud on both sides. I think it's fair to say that neither of these leaders really represent the people or are really there for proper change in the Ivory Coast. You know, Gbagbo was a despot. He had his presidential compound and all his perks. He allowed the corporations to have free reign. He was corrupted, like lots of other African leaders. They buy him off with all this Western materialism, and then they do the bidding of the West. But this Ouattara, who they claim is the winner, he just so happened to be educated in the United States and is a former chief of the IMF. This is a banking stooge. So it's not to say that Gbagbo was a good leader, but Ouattara is only there to continue the New World Order agenda. He's a stooge for the Western banking cartels and corporations. Even if he was legitimately elected, if people really did vote for him, which there actually isn't much proof of. The UN say, oh, he's the winner, but they've not really shown any proof of that. But just say that people did vote for him. It's only because the majority of the Ivory Coast citizens have been brainwashed, just like we're fed propaganda to vote for either Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem, the big three. They're all still pawns of the bankers, they're all still pro-EU and pro-New World Order. Think about it, do you honestly think if every citizen of the Ivory Coast was taught John Perkins' economic hitman in school, that they'd vote for an IMF chief? So I don't particularly think either Gbagbo or the IMF's Ouattara are good leaders. But the point is, this is an imperialist agenda. The democracy is just an illusion. It's neo-imperialism masked as democracy, but really controlled by cartel capitalism. It's the same old story that we've seen time and time again. And the turning point really, where the Western elite have decided to throw Gbagbo under the bus, you know, what made them need to install this new puppet from the IMF? Well, this Gbagbo, basically, he opened up the markets to China and Russia, the two superpowers that at the current time won't play ball with the Western-led push for global governance, for global control. So you can understand why the West, under the control of the corporations and the banks, are wanting to install an IMF chief. You can't be giving contracts and oil and resources to China and Russia at this point in time. And some people, I know this because I get a lot of people on YouTube, some people are going to say, well, don't you think China and Russia are really part of the New World Order anyway? Aren't they all part of the same secret societies? Well, yes and no. China wants a New World Order, Russia wants a New World Order, but the point is, they want to be at the helm of it. They want to be the ones leading it, which goes against this Euro-American Israeli current power structure. Both sides want to rule over the people. Do you think if China got full control over the world that they're going to be nice about it? They're going to be evil dictators as well. Do you think if Russia ended up taking over the world, do you think that Russia are somehow going to be any better than what's the New World Order now? Of course not. They all want to rule the world. That's just the nature of the powerful blocks in the world. That's just the way it is. But I don't think China and Russia are somehow on the side of the Anglo-American establishment, with Israel thrown in there. So, in hating what we call the ruling elite, it doesn't mean that I support the Chinese elite or the Russian aristocracy. And I am sure that probably if China became too much to handle for the West, and we've already seen this, yeah, powerful rich corporations have jumped ship to China. But this is a complex issue. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. But the point is, right now, China and Russia are a threat, and Gbagbo let them in on the action. So he's got to go. They've got to replace him with another puppet that's more friendly to the Western corporations. I'm still getting static. I hope you can all hear me okay. Yeah, there don't seem to be any problems there. And anyway, here's what I wrote in part of the article. Like all modern military conflicts, the intervention has been sold as a human rights mission. But with over 1,000 dead and the Red Cross burying people on a daily basis, it's clear that the globalists are really after stronger control over the country's resources and financial opportunities, rather than to protect anyone. The Ivory Coast is the world's leading exporter of cocoa and a large producer of coffee and palm oil. Speaking of oil, it just so happens that one of the principal US imports from the region is petroleum. Oil discoveries began in the mid-90s and have continued ever since. In May of 2003, Tullow Oil plc announced an oil discovery and confirmed the hydrocarbon potential of the area. In May 2010, Global Natural Resources Inc. announced another discovery. Then in September of 2010, Tullow made what has been described as the largest oil discovery in Africa during modern times, producing a potential of 550 million barrels. With the CIA coup of Iran's Mohammad Mossadegh in the 50s, who had planned to nationalize the Iranian oil, the illegal invasion of Iraq, and countless other examples, if there's oil to be pillaged, then there's Western-backed human rights missions to be had. The Ivory Coast is no different. President Gbagbo committed a cardinal sin in the eyes of the business barons and opened up the country's markets to China and Russia, two of the major roadblocks for the expansion of the Western-led New World Order. China got a series of telecom deals, and Russia was allowed in on the oil discoveries. This is most likely why Russia have tried to remain silent on the matter of the election. It's the same old story. We're seeing it in Libya. We'll say through the media that we need to save a bunch of people from an evil dictator, and then we'll accidentally cause the deaths of innocent people anyway, and we'll take some of that oil. It's been going on for decades. And you'd think that at least after Iraq, people would start to take notice of what we're really doing in these armed conflicts all over the world. Whether it be through our own military, whether it be through NATO, whether it be through the UN, you'd think people would actually start to take notice of the real reasons behind these things. And I don't know to what degree people do understand this and ignore it because it makes their lives easier. I don't know what degree people are just completely ignorant. I don't know whether people have some psychological problem that stops them from looking into it. There's all sorts of different reasons why people haven't woken up to this. And at the same time, you can say the same for the media. It's not clear that the media are conspiring. Not everybody sitting at a news desk is going, yeah, we've got to lie about this so Bob the oil baron can save all his oil. It's not that simple. There's compartmentalization. Some people, I think the majority of people are just deluded. They believe in their own bullshit and they're stuck in these bubbles, and everybody's reassuring them that their bubble's correct, so they never step outside of the bubble. It's like I was saying this on Pal Talk a few days ago. Plug there for Red, White and Blue. I have a bunch of middle class aunties, right, and they were all talking about the cuts, and my mum's like, well, actually the problem's the bankers. This is why, you can't be in debt to bankers and have a free society and all this kind of thing. And they all look at my mum, and you can see there's a twinkle in her eye that, oh, she could be right. But then one of the aunts offers a different opinion, and they're all like, oh yes, because they're trying to keep themselves within that bubble, because if they don't, it's so incredibly scary, and you don't want to know that you've been living a lie all your life. So everybody keeps everybody else in check and deludes themselves. People play roles in society. a policeman is led to believe that he's doing good, and he might cut corners, and he might speed through traffic lights, and he might bodge up a couple of cases because he's lazy or whatever, but he tells himself, I'm a policeman, I'm doing this for a good cause, and they delude themselves. It's a psychological trick, and I've seen it happen time and time again. But there are those people that do know what's going on, and it's becoming sickening to listen to politicians and media personalities and different talking heads on TV. It's becoming sickening to listen to them talk about human rights in all these situations. It makes me sick because it's not about human rights, and they've been discredited time and time again. Every single one of these instances, after the fact, we find out, or if we already knew before that, we were trying to shout out about it, but we find out that no, it wasn't about human rights, that most of the deaths occurred during or after the wars because of the commotion and problems we'd already caused during them, and it turns out we were just there to take oil and things like that. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? Well, a lot of these people, they're doing it over and over again because they're actually in on it, and they know full well that it's not about human rights. And I was watching Question Time a few weeks ago, and they had this Lib Dem MP called Sarah Tether on there. This evil bitch. She's the epitome of liberal left cover. The people that make these incredibly evil actions, like bombing innocent civilians and stealing oil, it's these people that make it sound like it's a good idea. They're giving the warmongers cover with a phony liberal excuse like, oh, we've got to go save these people. At least some people are honest in their intentions. I've seen some people on the mainstream news saying, well, we need oil, what's wrong with that? At least they're honest. It's the people that are deluded and think they're doing the right thing, or are feeding their ego by pretending to do the right thing, or in this MP's case, I think deliberately spinning the story so well-meaning people go along with it when she knows full well that Libya and none of these situations have been about human rights. There was this one person in the audience, and he was talking about how Libya, it's all about stealing oil, how innocent people will die, why aren't we helping other countries where there are dictators, why are we selectively choosing the countries with resources or strategic positions or with oil? And like a pro, this corporate cocksucker reversed it on the audience member and basically said, are you willing to sit there and let innocent people die at the hands of Gaddafi? How will you feel when it's over and you know we could have done something? That evil bitch. That's a very, very clever psychological trick. And it wins over naive viewers and naive people in the audience. Have you ever seen Question Time? How they'll clap one person and then the other person will come back with some other political rhetoric and then they'll clap that person. It's basically, I cover pro wrestling, right, and it's called a cheap pop. It's the same as walking up in front of everybody in the middle of a wrestling ring and saying, USA is the best. And they'll go, yeah, USA. It's the same sort of thing. It's just cheap phrases that play on people's emotions. And she, like a pro, she spun that round on that audience member and tied him up and said, it was almost a straw man at the same time. You know, Are you just going to let innocent people die? Well, no, of course he's not going to let innocent people die. The reality is, we're murdering innocent civilians in these places anyway. But a lot of people don't know the implications of these military interventions because they use clever military terms to mask what these things mean. And this cow, this MP, Sarah Tether, knows exactly what she's doing. I could see it in her goddamn eyes. She was one of the Lib Dems. I did a little research on Wikipedia. She was one of the Lib Dems that went back on the tuition fees. She's a fucking liar. I know she's not watching this. I'm like trying to talk to her. She's not here. But just cosmically, beaming through the ether, Sarah Tether, you are a sick, deluded fucking liar with blood on your hands. And there's many of you out there, just like you, that know full well that you're selling the fucking world out to criminals. And you probably love it, don't you? Get this. She was part of the all-party parliamentary group on Guantanamo Bay, campaigning to help innocent people from being tortured. She does that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, she's campaigning to murder other people. What a sick, sick world we live in. And I'm going to take a quick break while I have a sip of water. Let me find a song. Won't Back Down? No, I won't play that. Okay, it's the end of the world as we know it, and hopefully that's what 2012 will actually be. It's not the end of the world, it's the end of the world as we know it, which means it only gets better from that point onwards. I've been checking the chat a bit, and yeah, I do agree, Cookie, it only takes a handful of people in positions of power to influence what happens. I think that's basically the system that we're in. It's a subtle form of propaganda that they've got at every stage, and people seem to go on living in it. But at the same time, there's definitely people that do know. They probably don't know the extent, but they do know they're selling out, and they just like to pretend to be in the loving, liberal, human rights bubble. And they know they're not really in it, but they just like the way it makes them feel when other people come up and say, oh, I really love what you're doing. I really support how you're fighting for those Africans, by doing absolutely fucking nothing for them. But you get my idea. And Vin, yeah, question time is it's definitely rigged. Have you ever seen the audience? I've seen some of the same people on the audience like 5 times. There's this one annoying, must be maybe younger than me, I think, but there's this really annoying kid with glasses who's just always on there. And I remember the what was it? Who's the BNP guy with the wobbly eye? Nick Griffin. When he was on there, it was blatantly a setup. You know, there were screening questions and all sorts. But of course, the whole point of that was to promote the BNP, to discredit some of the good things that they actually have in their manifesto. It's like, it's the turd in the punch bowl thing. We're anti-banking, we're anti-global warming alarmism, we're anti all this stuff, which the BNP are, but we're fucking racists. So it's the turd in the punch bowl. It discredits everything that a lot of us are fighting for. But yeah, let's get back to this Ivory Coast thing. Where is me notes gone? Yeah, I'll talk a bit about Gbagbo's rival. I hope I'm saying their names right. Gbagbo. If that's the wrong way of saying it, it's a pretty stupid way of saying it. Gbagbo. I think it's the right word anyway. His rival is a guy called Alassane Ouattara, a United States taught economist who has worked within the IMF and global banking cartel since 1968. He is a puppet of the New World Order financial oligarchy that is just as widely recognized for destroying and indebting nations for the benefit of Western corporations than helping them to develop under their own sovereignty. Ouattara is viewed as a legitimate democratic leader that can bring stability and unity, but the destabilization of the country is directly linked to his former employers at the IMF. The global financial giant extended loans to the Ivory Coast during the 80s, but doing business with the mob doesn't come without a catch. That catch being a structural adjustment program, a snazzy way to say you must do this else we bankrupt you. And of course, a lot of the time, these conditions that they put on these loans are often population reduction programs. They literally say, we're going to fuck up your finances if you don't cull your population. And then you get another loving liberal like Bill Gates, who sends over his vaccines to help with this population reduction. Our old friend Mr. Bill Gates. I don't know how many of you have excuse me, seen that video, and if not, YouTube it, it's worth watching again. He basically stands up there in front of a crowd of people and puts a little sum on his board. People plus life equals carbon dioxide. So people minus life equals less carbon dioxide. Ha 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 ha, goes the audience. But that's basically what he said. We've got to kill people to save the planet. I don't find that very funny. I'll move on through this article though. The Ivory Coast initially saw strong economic growth starting in the 60s, but falling world prices for cocoa and coffee saw their economy crash and burn through the 80s. But it was okay, the IMF were there to save them. Well, kind of. As reported in the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Monitor, February 2011, under the SAP, the country was required to cut government spending by 30%, cut capital expenditures by 15%, privatise state enterprises, deregulate the labour market, and eliminate price controls and public subsidies. State firms in the telecommunications, transport, electricity and water supply sectors were all privatised. The country is now indebted and beholden to the corporations. And in Gbagbo's case, he was working with the wrong corporations. So the UN and France have to go in there and bomb them to bits and say, no, you've got to work with us Western corporations, not Russia and China. It's not democracy, it's the freedom to choose the next puppet. And unfortunately, a lot of people in Africa don't have access to the internet, and they don't get to understand the intricacies of all of this. You know, you could get a dog to vote between eating a chocolate bone and a friggin', I don't know, this is the worst analogy ever. Oh god. But it's not hard to make people choose between two evils if they're not educated to the bigger picture. That's basically what I'm saying. Dogs and bones. With economic collapse naturally comes social collapse, and this has left the country both politically and militarily divided between North and South. since a northern-based rebellion in 2002. Now, I didn't have time to research this northern-based rebellion from 2002, but what's the betting that these rebels were funded and trained and armed by the West? Because it's now clear that the North is Western backed by Qatar now, and the North is predominantly Muslim. And we know how the West loves to fund Muslims into performing violent acts and then going to bomb them, calling them terrorists afterwards. We've never seen that before, have we? We've never seen Zbigniew Brzezinski saying, God is on your side. We've never seen that happen, have we? We've never seen Muslims funded in Kosovo in the 90s, resulting in British Muslims going to terror training camps. We've never seen that before, have we? It's ridiculous. And the South is made up of Christians who have stronger support from Bagbo. So they've divided it. And the article which I pasted earlier, which should be at the top of the show page anyway, it then goes on to explain how the chocolate corporations who get the cocoa and have enslaved everyone to harvest the cocoa for their big chocolate companies. And I made the point in the article, the irony and the obliviousness of fat Westerners stuffing their faces full of chocolate. They're actually funding a civil war in the Ivory Coast by stuffing their face full of chocolate. Stuff that's probably giving them cancer and diabetes and God knows what anyway. It's ridiculous. And I'm not saying that I've never eaten chocolate. Of course I eat chocolate. And I'm ashamed of myself. And I'm ashamed of myself for a lot of things. I'm slowly trying to add new elements into my life that makes me less ashamed of myself. That's why I went hunting for sweatshop free clothes, and I did find a British website that has organic cotton, and you know, they're a bit greeny, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with greeny. It's the people that want to take away everybody's wealth and lie about certain things. It's fine to be environmentally friendly, but global warming's a load of bollocks at the same time. So I found this shop, a few nice clothes, polo shirts and stuff. Fair enough. These are the kind of things I'm slowly trying to add. You know, I've tried to go organic on food, so I'm not eating battery farmed meat. I still think eating meat is a fine and natural thing to do, but there's no way I can support battery farming, not after watching things like is it Corn Inc. or Food Inc., that documentary I mentioned a few months back. But there's so many things. You can't beat yourself up about it, as Cookie said a few days ago. I can't remember whether that was Power Talk or on his show, but you can't beat yourself up about these things. But if you're aware, that's the first step, and if gradually you start changing your life, you know, being the change you want to see in the world, then hopefully things get better. But I've totally lost my train of thought. Chocolate companies. Basically, the chocolate companies were taking backhanders and were funding and getting money back from both sides of this civil war. A bit of divide and rule. And the last line of the article reads, "Imperialism never ended, it just put on a suit." And that's basically what happened. You know, the monarchies, the right to rule from the Lord, and all that kind of thing, kings and queens. We overthrew all that, supposedly, but we just replaced it with even more tyrannical dictators wearing suits and calling everything economics and all this other rubbish. You know, the uprisings, the original Illuminati, which was about overthrowing monarchy and overthrowing religion and superstition and all this archaic thinking and replacing it with science and rational thinking and all that, fine. But what we got are this intellectual upper class talking head dictatorship where we're told everything by people that supposedly know better. We're told to have vaccines because the doctors, the clever doctors that have proven it, say that this vaccine is safe, when we know a lot of vaccines aren't safe. And even if it is just a small ratio, they're not honest about it. So that's disingenuous, and that's morally corrupt. Before we go today, I just want to shout out Cookie and Travis. Travis's NWO update blog. I've been getting some traffic from that, and I saw that he put up a link to my website, so thanks for that, mate. I'll return the favour either tonight or tomorrow when I do updates on my site. Also Cookie, I'm not sure how long he's had his blog up, or even if it is his own blog or someone pretending to be Cookie, but I've got a little bit of traffic today from a blogspot blog entitled The Hairy Cookie Monster, so thanks for that as well, and I'll link back to you as well, so cheers for that, guys. And be sure to check Cookie in half an hour for his show The Rabbit Hole Orientation. But that's about it for this week. That was a little investigation into the Ivory Coast, typical IMF corporate takeover. I've been Keelan Balderson. Cheers everyone.